Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our IWFM Procurement and Contract Management Strategic Interest Group Annual General Meeting. Very warm welcome to everyone who's dialed in, who's either part of IWFM or not part of IWFM at the minute. Just by way of some introductions, I'm Chris Reeves. I'm the current chair of the SIG. In my day role, I'm a regional director with some peering in the PFI world. Just by way of some further introductions from the committee members, Daniel.
Good morning, everyone. Daniel Tyler, Deputy Chair of the SIG and Property Contracts Performance Manager for City of London Corporation.
Thank you, Daniel. Graham.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Graham Anderson. I'm the Secretary on the SIG and I work for the Scottish Government in contract management.
Thank you, Graham. Chris Jeffers.
Morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Chris Jeffers. I'm the Treasurer on the SIG, and as a day job, I'm a Principal in the Facilities Management Consultancy team at Mott MacDonald.
Thank you, Chris. George.
Hello, I'm George Darlington, coordinator of the social media inside the SIG, and I'm the former UBS facilities manager.
Thank you, George. Nick.
Good day, everyone. Nick Blake, member of the SIG, and day job is a FM consultant in procurement and contract management for Gardner and Theobald.
Thank you, Nick. And we're also joined by Jonathan Nobbs and Rebecca Rees, who will introduce you to as we go through the AGM today. So very warm welcome. Just by way of a couple of bits of housekeeping, just be grateful if you could keep your cameras off. We have got up to 130 odd people registered for the event, so it might just help the bandwidth if you can keep your cameras off, other than those presenting, if that's okay. We are recording the meeting as well, just as a courtesy heads up to everybody. By way of a couple of other things, there is opportunity as we go through the AGM for questions to be asked, but we will pick up any general questions for the SIG itself at the end of the presentation. During the presentation by Rebecca Rees on the Procurement Act, if there's any questions around that, if you can again feed them into the chat, and then we'll look to coordinate those at the end of Rebecca's session specifically. And then finally, there are some QR codes on the slides which give further detail on some of the information contained as we go through, if you wish to have your cameras ready. But we will send a link of the AGM recording around after the event today, should you wish to get any further details and take copies of the links again. Okay, thank you very much. So next slide, please, Ian. So just in terms of the agenda for today, give a chair's address just on some of the work we've been doing over the last year as part of the SIG. We're then joined by Jonathan Nobbs to give an overview of the IWFM membership and volunteering offering. As always, we're all on the lookout for either new members of IWFM and particularly new volunteers. I've been on the SIG now for a good 10 years, as have a few other people on the SIG, but we're always looking for new people to join the SIG. We've currently got eight committee members, with an individual joining quite recently. But if you are interested in joining the SIG, please do get in touch, and there's some contact details on how to do that at the end of the presentation. We've then joined by our special guest for this morning, Rebecca Rees, who I'll introduce a bit more at the time. We'll be talking on the Procurement Act 2023 and what that means to us in the FM arena. We've then got some formalities with election of committee members for the coming year, Secretary's report, Treasurer's report, and Daniel Tyler will be picking up on our planning for 25-26, and also some more general IWFM updates around training events and useful resources. So we'll then cover a general Q&A at the end, followed by any other business. And as I said, though, if you have got questions for Rebecca, specifically on the Procurement Act presentation, if you could feed that in at the time, as Rebecca will be leaving off after that session. Next slide, please, Ian. So in terms of Chair's address, next slide, please, Ian. So a key project we've been working on probably over the last couple of years at least, but specifically focused on during 24 and into 25 is we've brought together a working group of other professional bodies across the industry, including BISRIA, CIBSE and SFG20. And this is sort of focused on leading discussion and debate over what we as a SIG saw as 5 pillars within the FM industry, where we thought, all being sort of industry professionals and who've been within the industry for a number of years now, where there was maybe a lack of consistency across the industry, and probably what we believed was a lack of clear direction and consistency in the advice offered around these sort of things. Lots of different bodies and organisations have published, bits of material on these over the years, but we sort of saw a bit of a lack of cohesion in how that was presented for the industry as a whole. So a key bit for us was trying to bring together, some key parties within the industry and trying to work through a bit more standardization in terms of what was presented to the industry in terms of offering around these areas. We spent a lot of time discussing the term statutory in relation to FM. I think hopefully most people on the call will relate to the term statutory compliance, or we're all statutory compliant, being a commonly used phrase, but what does that actually mean? And I think certainly in my own personal experience, there's certainly been a degree of ambiguity over what the term statutory means, and even within the four working parties that I've mentioned there, we had lots of discussion over what we all thought that term meant. So working with those parties, we developed a sort of consistent definition for the term statutory in the context of workplace and facilities management. And we managed to get a joint press release signed off back in May 24. So all those organisations are now using common wording for the term statutory in relation to maintenance and inspections, which I think from a SIG perspective was a really, really positive outcome from all the discussions that we had, and reflective of all the good work that the different parties brought into that discussion and so on, to try and get that consistency, hopefully for the benefit of the industry as a whole. There was 4 other pillars that we were looking at around asset information, planned maintenance, remedial works, competence and record keeping. And we are currently working at collating the output of all those discussions into the next iteration of the SIG's Good Practice Guide for the Procurement and Contract Management SIG, which I'll come on to a bit more in my next slide. If you can just flick it on one, please, Ian. So the Good Practice Guide is the sort of cornerstone of what we do as the SIG. So we're currently doing an exercise at the minute to update that, bringing in all of the work that's gone on with those organisations and our own internal discussions over the last couple of years, and looking to issue an updated version of that in the near future, which Daniel will pick up on a bit more in our planning for 25-26 later in the AGM. In addition to that, we've also contributed to articles within the IWFM Facilitate magazine. Recent example one in February on compliance, picking up some of the work that I've just touched on. and also presented at some IWFM SIPS events on best practice in procurement and contract management in an FM arena. Next slide, please, Ian. So now I'd like to hand over to Jonathan Nobbs, who I'll let introduce himself, who'll be talking about the IWFM volunteer programme.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Very pleased that you're able to join us this morning for today's AGM. As Chris said, I'm just going to very quickly work through the activity that we've been doing with IWFM's volunteers over the last few years. So, as many of you will know, IWFM is incredibly privileged to have more than 250 volunteers that invest their time freely in order to support the sector, the profession, and IWFM. And in fact, all members of the committee that have brought together this AGM and done the work and the outcomes that Chris has outlined are all volunteers. And I would just like to take this opportunity, Chris and committee, to thank you for the contribution that you give to the profession, the sector, and IWFM at large. Over the last 3 years, in line with our strategy, one of our key objectives has been to increase the level of participation that our volunteers can have with IWFM and to ensure that they're engaging in meaningful and impactful work. And we're making some good progress in this area. So now our volunteers have an opportunity to get involved in some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that are facing the sector. For example, inspiring the next generation to join us, to mentor new talent coming forward, or to help to support that FM is a career of choice and we can all stop saying we just fell into it. So what does this mean for our special interest groups? So as you know, for all areas of our professional standards, IWFM has a special interest group. And our chairs and IWFM together are clear on 2 points. The first one is that we must ensure that our members have access to guidance at each stage of their career journey, so they have the tools to do their job if they're just starting out, if they're their first management position, or they're leading their area of work. And secondly, we want to ensure that the profession and the sector is represented around the table in various regional, national, or global policy or standards initiatives. So we are working hand in hand with the chairs of our special interest groups at the moment to realign and repurpose the role of our special interest groups to ensure that they are the subject matter experts leading our profession into the next decade. So what does this mean to you? So as Chris said at the start, if you are motivated to put something back, if you want to support the next generation, if you want to support the future of the profession and add your voice to the collective voice that is trying to change the profession for the better, then we would like to hear from you. And Ian, if you could just go on to the next slide, please. So over the next month or so, we will be hosting a series of events that you can attend in order to find out more about being a volunteer, the benefits to you and the benefits to your employer. The QR code is available, and as Chris said, we will be circulating that after the session. On that note, Chris, I will hand back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Jonathan. Next slide, please, Ian. Okay, so it's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Rees to our AGM this morning as our guest speaker. I will let Rebecca introduce herself fully, but she is kindly here today to give us a talk on the Procurement Act 2023 and what this means to us as professionals in the FM arena. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for inviting me to your AGM today, and just to give an update on the new Procurement Act 2023. I work with Sophie and Chris on the competency working group to deal with building safety issues, and so know your organisation through that work, but today is more about procurement generally rather than simply in the building safety space. I've got a presentation that I'll click through, but if people do have questions, please do put them in the chat and we can pick them up at the end of the session, and I hope that works well. And I'm going to be doing a bit of a next slide session, so thank you for moving those on. So if I can go to the next slide. First of all, I wanted to talk about context. I think it's really important that what we have seen through the reform agenda is really that procurement touches every area of an organisation. And we saw that, firstly, in the fact that procurement was the first area of legislation to go through Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson's number 10 rules reform. Who would have thought it? But this was the first thing they wanted to take back control of following Brexit. And it's taken quite a while to get there. But you can see on my slide their aims for procurement, that they wanted to free us from bureaucratic and process-driven regulations. They wanted to make it quicker, simpler, more transparent, emphasize value for money, and competitive and objective decision-making criteria. Again, make it simpler and more flexible. And also look at who was winning public sector work and try and facilitate the kind of glide path into the public sector purse by small and medium enterprises, startups, and those new to the sectors. Whether that has all been achieved by the Procurement Act and the huge array of guidance that we now have is definitely up for debate. But make no mistake, this was a political move. We never started from a blank sheet of paper. And if I can go on to the next slide, you'll see that if you recall that kind of hard Brexit, soft Brexit conversation, part of it from a procurement point of view necessitated us to signing up to what's called the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Government Procurement. And that is obviously hubbed out of the World Trade Organization, and that is a multi-part, well, it's plurilateral trade agreement with numerous different countries. We've also got lots of other bilateral free trade agreements with other countries, and also our trade and cooperation agreement with the European Union. All of those have obligations concerning procurement in them. So the fact that Boris Johnson could light a match and enjoy a warming fire of regulations was somewhat overstating the issue. And you will see in the Procurement Act probably a lot of what irritated you or calmed you before, because actually the European regulations that get such a bad rap are by and large derived from the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Government Procurement, which as part of a soft Brexit, we were very eager to sign back up to. I think the other thing is that a lot of frustration with procurement across the UK is more down to cultural or skills-based decisions rather than what legislation requires clients to do. So often we get a computer says no mentality because of the individual procurement officer's experience or expertise, not because the legislation prevents them from doing something. So actually, a lot of procurement reform and the discussions we've been having have been around increasing capacity and capability in the public sector to ensure they make decisions, yes, within a legislative framework, but primarily to ensure good commercial outcomes. And if you speak to anybody from the Cabinet Office, they get very irritated at lawyers like me who talk about legal compliance. They are not interested necessarily in legal compliance. They want to ensure that what procurement practitioners and what clients are doing is running procurements in a way that will achieve value for money, fit for purpose, commercial outcomes. So we've had the Procurement Act, and you'll recall on the previous slide that I gave a quote about simplicity. But not only do we have a primary piece of legislation, which is fairly technical and has a lot of schedules to it, But we also have the procurement regulations, 2024, which set out a lot of technical detail in them. But we also have the National Procurement Policy Statement, which in my mind is the political football. What does the current government want to achieve through procurement? We had one back in 2021 from the Conservative government. We've now got this new one published in the 13th of February this year, which is very much in missions language and reflects the policy objectives of the current Labour government. And of course, the National Procurement Policy Statement can change as objectives of the same government or different governments come through. We also have a lot of guidance, over 40 guidance notes. We've got ambition documents. There is a lot of information out there to plough through. So I would also say that I don't think in terms of simplification, we've reduced the amount of information that you will need to get to grips with, either as a client or as a bidder. So there's a lot out there still. Now, it went live at the end of last month. We're not yet a month into the process or the new regime. And indeed, what I'm finding in the first month is not a lot of difference because of the transitionary provisions. So if you issued a contract notice, practically speaking, on Friday, the 21st of February before 5:30 p.m. and before that, that procurement and indeed all existing contracts and framework agreements before that date, even if they're awarded and tendered now, i.e. after the 24th of February, will be covered by the old regime. And that's practically sensible. It will make things simpler. But until the old stuff runs out or expires, we will have to juggle as clients 2 regimes. And so I can foresee for the next decade having to carry around still the Public Contract Regulations 2015 as well as the Procurement Act. So please bear that in mind when you're looking at a contract to manage it or to understand whether you can vary it or anything. You still need to have the Public Contract Regulations in mind. So the bonfire hasn't been lit yet. Next slide, please. So let's just go into some detail. You'll see, and I'll come on to the competitive flexible procedure at the moment. There's still a lot of practices that are reflected in the Procurement Act that we should have been doing anyway. Looking at contract pipelines and making preparations for those, we now have a pipeline notice. So I think if you spend over £100 million per year in third-party spend, you will be asked to set out your contract pipeline in a notice and publish it to the central digital platform. A lot of clients already run, already should run contract registers and be going out on early pre-market engagement, but that is really pushed and encouraged under the new rules. Evaluation practice hasn't changed much, and we'll come on to that in more detail in a minute. But again, the whole reform agenda has made clients re-look at how they are evaluating and what they're taking into account, and physically who is doing it and what they should be doing, which can only be a good thing. But that won't change too much under the Procurement Act. And again, really a good evaluation depends on the capacity and capability of the people undertaking it, less so the legal structure within which it falls. I would say the central government, local government are used to Freedom of Information Act principles, but for any contract above 5 million, 5.3 million for works contracts, clients now have to issue a contract details notice at the end of the competition. So we should be seeing a lot more contracts being published on the central digital platform frankly, competitors and other interested parties to review. What we've been working through with clients at the moment is actually how to redact that commercially sensitive information ahead of publishing them, so that, frankly, we preserve competition by keeping commercially sensitive information back from potential competitors in due course. I think clients do have an obligation to train up their potential markets, not so that they can challenge you if you get it wrong, but actually these are new rules. And if we are to get SMEs into the marketplace, they need to understand the rules of engagement, and therefore holding, know your bidders days. What are these documents we're asking you to fill them in, and why are we asking you to fill them in the first place, is always a good thing in terms of bringing the market along with you, so that it's not a surprise when they get those tender documents and open them up. I'm sure a lot of you do, but for local government and housing association and university clients, they are not subject to the playbooks in the way central government departments are. And most of my clients have not read the playbooks. Now, in many walks of life, that's not a problem. However, the Procurement Act has been drafted by the Cabinet Office, and I've spoken to them, and in the mind of a lot of drafters is the fact that the clients will be running their procurements along a business case and a playbook process. And therefore, a lot of what is written in the Procurement Act makes those assumptions in it. And therefore, what I'm saying to my what are called legally sub-central clients, i.e. those that aren't central government departments, is read the playbooks, because actually there are some really good things in there around pre-market engagement, what you should be doing, the tools that you can use to help you do that kind of stuff in the playbooks themselves. So do have a read, and hopefully that will add a bit of meat to the framework that the Procurement Act and the regulations provide you. Okay, next slide, please. Let's get down to what I call the poster girl, really, of the Procurement Act, the competitive flexible procedure. The government always said that they wanted to make procurement procedures more flexible. And one way of doing that has been to combine all of sort of the selective and negotiated procedures into one. So you can see on this slide that I've written 6 or 7 different procedures, which are now all effectively incorporated into one procedure. So if you were going to use a restricted procedure or a competitive dialogue process, you would now adopt the competitive flexible procedure and shape that procedure according to your needs. Now, I've said it can include a participation period, and that is the new word for that selection part of your procurement process, where you would send out a selection questionnaire or a PQQ or whatever you call those documents, get them to express an interest by giving you that information, and then down select 2, 3, or 5 or whatever to which you send the tender documents to. You can include one of those in a number of competitive flexible procedures we're advising on for clients at the moment. They've chosen to sort of put that in with the main tender documents, and they're going to deal with selection further on down the line. So it's sort of like an uber open procedure with negotiation, etc. I'm not too sure how those are going to pan out yet. I do have a slight kind of concern that we're asking bidders to do too much at the time that they don't know whether they're even qualified to bid for it or not, but we will see how those pan out. We then have a tendering process. And really, depending on what a client wants to do, depends on what that tendering period looks like. So it could just be a straight restricted procedure, i.e. here's my requirements, give me a price, give me some quality responses, and then I'll go away and evaluate them. So a sort of desktop process. But you could also include negotiation sessions, dialogue sessions, interviews, bidders information sessions, whatever you want to do really, and any combination of the same, as long as you keep it proportionate to the type, the nature, the value, the duration of the contract that you're letting. And I would say proportionate to the appetite of the market as well, because there's no point getting a very small number of people to jump through a whole load of hoops if, by asking them to do so, they say, oh, it's not worth a candle, I'm not going to bid for this process. And there's minimum timescales there. Those are the minimum timescales set out in the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Government Procurement. So that was as low as we could go on minimum timescales in order to comply with international obligations. What I would say is that flexibility has its parameters. And I've had a number of clients that have gone on the Cabinet Office's deep dives and have been effectively told, look, put some wording in your tender documents that allows you to do whatever you want, whenever you want to do it. So if you want to have an interview, but then decide you don't want to have an interview, reserve to yourself that flexibility. And I would urge caution on that. I think flexibility has its parameters, and the competitive flexible procedure really sort of combines its flexibility from the outset, which is, as a client, you now have flexibility as to what your procedure looks like. But as soon as you send out your documents or you call for tenders, then that flexibility is sort of set in aspect, and you should be doing, you should be going through whatever your documents say you are going to go through. And the difficulty in changing it once you've got bidders in the room is being able to prove in an auditable sense that you're not making changes in order to favour a particular bidder or type of bidder, or indeed try and get somebody out of the room. So flexibility, I think, has its parameters. And all that Section 31 says is, look, you can change the procedure, change it at these times and you'll be fine. If you change it after that, you need to roll that process back in order to be able to make those changes and give people a fair shot at that contract. Next slide, please. Now, what I've given you here, you're going to get a link to these slides, is simply, I've given you 4 slides, which if we can cycle through them now, these are all set out at the back of the Cabinet Office guidance. And you will see here that the first one was a restricted procedure. The second one was sort of dialogue and negotiation. This is a dialogue process where you need to kind of stop, rejig or add to your tender documents and then go again. And then the final one is what we would call an innovation partnerships in old money. I've included those slides just so that you can see what different processes the competitive flexible procedure can adopt. As I said, the detail is in the Cabinet Office guidance, and you will be getting a link to these slides later on. So next slide, please. The next thing that I hear a lot about is the massive difference that the change from meet to MAT is going to make. Under the old rules, it's most economically advantageous tender. Under the new rules, they've adopted the terminology of the WTO's GPA, which is most advantageous tender. And indeed, now the primary legal obligation is that a contracting authority may award a public contract to the supplier that submits the most advantageous tender. So we've dropped the E for economic. Should that make much difference? And the answer to that is no. And you'll see on that slide that the Cabinet Office in their green paper said, look, this wasn't a revolution. The dropping of the E was to reassure contracting authorities that they can take a broader view of what is most advantageous tender into account when assessing value for money and indeed what was the best bid. Now that, by my reckoning, has been in there since 2004, when it was made very explicit under that public directive called the Consolidated Directive, that economic, social and environmental considerations could be taken into account when assessing public tenders. So this is something that's been around for a couple of decades, but we still see in the public sector that race to the bottom, and people are pointing either solely on price or in a way that price is the key determinant. And really what the Cabinet Office is trying to say here is, look, we do have a value toolkit under the playbooks. We do have this push for social value. It is not in any way misaligned with the Procurement Act or the need to get value for money. So next slide. So really, you'll see here that not much has changed. 23.2 is interesting. There was a lot in the Green Paper about trying to break the link between award criteria and the subject matter of the contract, and yet it is still there. Award criteria have to be sufficiently clear, measurable and specific. An awful piece of legal statutory drafting. They say that award criteria shouldn't break the rules on technical specification. I have no idea what that means legally. I guess it means that if you are going to nominate a particular supplier or product, that you need to add those magic words or equivalent after them to ensure that bidders are not discriminated against if they want to put up an equivalent or non-national product. We also have the Section 12 objectives as well, which talk about same treatment of bidders. It talks about declaring your award criteria up front to allow bidders to understand the basis on which decisions are made. We have value for money, and we have proportionality in there at Section 23 as well. I think one of the game changers should be 23.3a, which says a client needs to provide an assessment methodology, i.e. a sort of cradle to grave description as to how you are going to evaluate the tenders, how you're going to allocate the scores. You need to put a description of what good looks like in order for the bidders to understand how they can get a specific score, whether that be 0 to 5, 0 to 100, 0 to 13, whatever it is. And I think that 23.3a should actually start changing behaviours in a way that the meet to map won't do, because it's very specific. It's a transparent declaration of the entire evaluation process, which I think will be very much welcomed by bidders, but also obligates the client to really think about the detail of the application of those scores and then the weighting of the criteria as well. And next slide on this point, please. And of course, what can you evaluate? Well, Section 23.5 talks about the subject matter of the contract. Again, it's legally quite odd, but we make it work by saying, look, what is the subject matter of the contract? Clearly, it's the goods, services or works to be supplied, including any aspect of their life cycle, including how they're going to be disposed, the costs of that, the captured carbon, whatever you want to evaluate, you can under that first bullet point there. How and when the goods, services or works will be supplied. So having a look at method statements, will you use digital solutions or AI to help you deliver, your back office support to that contract, etc. Interestingly, sort of says, we'll look at the people that deliver your contract, which for you must be a key differentiator in who delivers the contracts and the difference between one bidder and another. But it says, but only where those factors are likely to make a material difference to the quality of the service being supplied. And then you can take into account price, cost or value for money in all circumstances. So that's not just a CapEx price or a price per hour or unit or anything. You can take into account life cycle costs, costs on exit, whatever that might be, TUPE costs, pensions, redundancy, all of that can go into the consideration of the contract cost for you. I'm going to leave the other bits in there. Safe to say that it does set section 24 that you can refine the award criteria, but again, use that sensibly and in a way that doesn't discriminate in favor or can be accused of discriminating in favor of a particular bidder. Next one, please. So we've done competitive flexible procedure. We've done most advantageous tender. I'm going to leave that one because I'm sort of running out of time and I don't want to kind of take up the AGM too much. But next slide, please. What I wanted to broadly talk about was what's in the news quite a lot at the moment, and that's exclusion and debarment regime. I do see these as two different regimes. The exclusion regime is what we've got already. We have mandatory exclusion grounds, we have discretionary exclusion grounds, and we are supposed to apply those on a project-specific basis to the bidders that respond to our opportunities. We have the ability for those bidders that declare, particularly a discretionary exclusion ground, the ability to ask whether they've self-cleaned, i.e., is this ground continuing or likely to occur again? And if it has occurred, have you confessed and admitted your liability, and have you put in place auditable, provable steps that you are doing something to address the situations and the people that caused the problem in the first place? But part of that exclusion regime, i.e., can this bidder bid for my contract, now requires a client to look to see whether the bidders are on a central debarment list. Now, this is am I running out of time, Chris? 5 minutes?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, 2 or 3 more minutes.
I'll chat through this quickly.
Yeah, just so we can finish on time. Thank you.
Yeah. And the debarment list is centrally held by the Cabinet Office, and they will be putting bidders on that list who are found guilty of a mandatory exclusion ground. And that can be stuff like fraud, child trafficking, sort of all the theft, criminal offences. But they can also go on for discretionary exclusion grounds. And the one thing that I would say, can I go on to the next slide really quickly, is that if you exclude a bidder on your procurement, you need to send a notice to the Cabinet Office, and that will trigger an investigation into that bidder as to whether it should go on the debarment list more generally. So bidders will be very concerned, A, not to go on the debarment list, because that then prevents them from bidding for public sector contracts for 5 years, up to 5 years. But also, they will not want to be excluded because of that trigger for investigation going forward. So there could be more difficult conversations coming down the line around past performance, because poor past performance is a discretionary exclusion ground. So if an incumbent who has not performed well has had the contract terminated or has had it brought to a mutual conclusion early on, will be very minded to understand whether you are going to exclude it in future, or indeed publicise that early expiry or conclusion. I think there's one more slide on that, but you will see these. It's just the details. We've got contract life cycle stuff, but people have been talking about this a lot, and there's lots on the web about that. And then the final thing was just some compliancy issues. those things that are sort of relevant at the moment, and you should be kind of cognizant of going through on each procurement, but I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, really appreciate it. Just as a reminder, if there are any questions for Rebecca, if you can put them in the chat. I've seen there aren't any questions for yourself as yet, Rebecca, but give it a little bit of time, just see if anything else comes in. And yeah, just to answer the question that is in there, there will be a recording of the meeting circulated after. Okay, so if there's no further questions for Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us today. Really interested and insightful presentation, and yeah, we'll see how it all settles down with all the new ways of working and everything. But on behalf of myself and the SIG as a whole, thank you very much for taking time out today, and wish you a good weekend.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so if we can go on to next slide, please. So I'll now hand over to Graham Anderson for the election of committee members.
Thanks, Chris. So next slide, please. So the SIG can have up to 12 members, and we're currently sitting at, I think, 7. And it's worthwhile noting that we've got 100% turnout today, so the meeting is definitely quorate. Within those 12 members, there are 4 named positions: the chair, the deputy chair, the secretary, and the treasurer. The committee's been fairly settled over recent years, but Chris Reeves has decided to step down from his role of chair. And I'm sure that everybody on the committee would like to extend their thanks to Chris for his leadership over the past couple of years, and particularly with respect to driving forward the work on the agreed definition of statutory that he covered earlier in the presentation. Before he stepped down, Chris hosted a meeting that was to determine the future makeup of the committee. So as you can see on this slide, Daniel Tyler, who had up until that point been deputy chair, he has stepped up to lead the committee, and Nick Blake has come in and will be filling the role of deputy chair. Chris Jeffers and myself, we are staying on in the roles of treasurer and secretary, and George is taking on the role of social media and events coordinator, and Chris is reverting to a general member along with our new joinee, Steph McCahill. So those that has been agreed ahead of the this meeting, and it's presented here just for your information. So I think that's all I have to say on the. Yeah, thank you. So seamlessly into my role as secretary. So this slide is it gives you an idea of the sort of commitment that we have by way of attending meetings throughout the year, and I suppose it gives anybody who might be considering joining putting their name forward to join the committee an idea of the level of commitment. Of course, everybody's a volunteer, and so there's no expectation that everybody will be able to attend every event. So there's monthly meetings, and as you can see, most of them are Teams meetings, and those tend to last about an hour. But then every 2 to 3 months, there are face-to-face meetings in London. Until recently, those have tended to be at the Scottish Government offices near Blackfriars, but recently Daniel was able to host a meeting at Guildhall and tacked on a very interesting tour at the end of that. The meetings focus on the major pieces of work that we're undertaking at the time, things like the work on statutory compliance or the Good Practice Guide, but there's also more sort of general checking on progress against the plan. Personally, I've also benefited from these meetings as an opportunity to use the experience of the other members as a sounding board for things that are coming up in my working life. And I should also, I forgot to mention that a regular attendee at these meetings has also been Sophie Hooper, who is the head of policy and research. And she's been invaluable in terms of making connections between the work that we do as the procurement and contract management SIG and other work streams, both in IWFM and in the wider industry. And I think the only other thing of note is that the face-to-face meetings tend to finish and with a beer in a sort of very old pub just off Fleet Street, which is quite an attraction for some of us. So that's everything I have to say about this role. Next slide, please. So I will pass you over to Chris for the Treasurer's report.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, absolutely. Conscious of time, so I'll be super quick. And I've noticed actually that some of you watching, you might see that I'm called Daniel today. So 2 for the price of 1. It's just the link, the Zoom link. It's called me Daniel. Wee bit of context just before I give a very short update. So we are an information and guidance focused SIG, special interest group. We always have been, and I think we always will be. So our primary output is the written word. So it's the documentation that we produce for our community. And we're really proud of our record of producing good practice guides and guidance notes over recent years, all of which you can find on the IWFM website. That does mean that we don't have an in-depth history, a detailed history of events. We are planning to do something about that. We want to improve that. But revenue raising is focused really on the products that we produce. It always has been, and moving forward, I think it will be too. Hence, in terms of a treasurer report as such, Q1 of 2025, we're actually at a 0 balance in funds. So literally pounds, shillings and pence, 0 balance. We do expect to incur a small amount of costs through the year in expenses, which is a pretty standard thing in terms of the face-to-face meetings that Graham just put up on the slide there, as we did in 2024, but that's equaled out. So we're currently at 0 balance. Part of our planning is, as I say, to develop more guidance documents, and we're looking at sponsorship opportunities for that. So I'll leave Daniel to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the planning, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But that really is the conclusion of the Treasurer's report. An easy job for me today, and I do hope it gets more complicated as the year goes through. But I'll hand over to, sorry, Chris, I'm not sure who I'm handing over to, but
Daniel, Chris.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chris.
Cheers, Dan.
Thanks, Chris. If we can roll on to the next slide. Brilliant. So I'll just take a quick headline overview of our plans for the forthcoming year. So as been mentioned before, is the update of the Good Practice Guide. We obviously need to reflect the Procurement Act 23 within that and try and incorporate all those key messages that Rebecca portrayed earlier. Incorporate our work on the statutory compliance definition and the work that Chris has led us through over the last 2 years, but also to reflect changing priorities in the world of FM and how we procure services and contract management, particularly as focus changing towards ESG and CSR, and now up to 20%, if not more, of evaluation criteria being placed upon there. So we need to update and make sure the guide is contemporary and reflects current trend. Purpose of the guide really is aligning with IWFM's strategic aims. So we aim to be the trusted voice of FM, first choice destination for information, and also enable community and peer-to-peer learning and engagement. So the Good Practice Guide is the SIG's one of our main outputs to meet that. Once we've moved through the Good Practice Guide, that'll be a procurement-focused product. We aim to look at contract management and produce a guidance note for that. So a supplementary document there, focusing on in-term contract management, the skills, the tools used to deliver that, and what contract mechanisms there are available to you to leverage best outcomes. As it's been mentioned, we're looking for sponsorship, and we're currently active discussions there with wider industry organisations that will enable the production of the good practice guide. But we also aim to launch that with an event, hopefully an in-person event, or maybe a series of webinars, interactive guest speakers and panels, to really bring the good practice guide to life and to deliver that, and so people can fully understand what its content is and how that impacts their work. So also looking to collaborate more with our IWFM community, so that'd be the regional networks and other SIGs. We want to work with the Rising FM network to help generate the next FM professionals, next generation coming through, and the importance of procurement and contract management, and what does that mean to them, whether that's a career path directly within procurement and contract management, or how that helps them in their primary role of having that wider understanding of FM and how services are procured and delivered. I think we recognise the continuous evolution of AI, artificial intelligence. Big topic, kind of, is seeping more and more into everybody's daily work. But what does that mean in procurement? What does that mean in contract management? And what work can we do with the technology SIG to tie those strands together? And then from an operational point of view, we want to focus on our social media presence, make use of the channels available to us more effectively, engage our members, reach out to a new audience, and use that to further spread the work that we're doing and have an engaged community. And great that George on our committee is now leading that piece of work for us. So we hope to be able to put out more content throughout the year. If we can move on to the next slide. So I think we've kind of probably got a flavour of what the SIG is now. We're looking for more members. All memberships are welcome. Essentially, we aim to contribute to being part of the trusted voice of FM by providing support and professional guidance on procurement and contract management matters. And we aim to share best practice and work with other industry bodies to define standards and what good looks like. Current committee is predominantly made up from introduce ourselves of either public sector or consultancy background. So we would like to, if possible, balance that. Further our debate, give different perspectives in our committee meetings and the work that we publish. So particularly interested for anybody who is either a private sector client or on the supplier side. Perhaps you work on bid teams, etc., and you're on the opposite end of the material that's been put out of tender, then we'd really be interested to hear from those interested about joining the committee, but similarly open to all applications. Experience and enthusiasm in kind of driving our output this year around events and social media present and production of documentation would be a key thing. So again, a kind of a passion in that area would be a great asset to the committee. If we can move forward. So just some quick things I'll counter for you regarding training updates and events. And if you have your phones ready, there's going to be a few QR codes to scan. So just focus on a few things that are coming through from IWFM, which I think have a particular relevance for procurement and contract management. First one, probably evident in the title, contract management and commercial models for KPIs and SLAs. I think going back to Rebecca's slides, you can see the importance of KPIs and their publishment of those under Procurement Act. So if you have any hesitance around what effective KPIs and SLAs are, then that's a great event training opportunity there. Environmental and sustainability continues rightfully to gain prominence, and now how is that incorporated into tenders, into a procurement process? How do we contract manage suppliers to deliver sustainable solutions throughout the contract term? So having that foundation knowledge around environmental and sustainability matters, I think, is a key skill for anybody working in FM. So great event in June to attend there. And then online, there's the Tech Survival Guide, which is small e-learning packages. Data filtering through and everything, the importance of capturing data, and from a procurement perspective, the importance of the data and the quality of that data that we put into tenders, so we have good tender responses and quality outcomes. So having that base understanding and knowledge around data and how we harvest that and how we use that, I think is an essential skill for anybody to have in the procurement and contract management field. I'll just give a second there for the QR code. Thanks, Ian. If we can move forward. So this is just really a signpost to the Market Outlook survey. QR code will link you to that, so you can download it. 2 elements just to draw attention to from a procurement contract management perspective is information on social value and late payments. The late payments are something we've had direct input into as a committee in working with Sophie Hooper, and links in there with the central government on how that impacts FM. So commercial element there of contract management. But as I said before, social value, sustainability, environmental, all growing areas and progressive areas within procurement and contract management. So I would recommend anybody to download that report and take a read through. The next slide. So a key piece of work, and this kind of identifies the cross collaboration between industries and between IWFM with a wider network, is the procurement competence framework. And just want to invite Chris Jeffers back in just to say a few words about this.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I'll be super quick. Yeah, this is, I think, a really positive development for our industry. So I've been lucky enough to be involved in the last about 18 months, I think, in terms of support to the development of this. It's a document that is imminent. It's about to be published. Don't hold me to it, but April, May this year. The purpose of it, it's come out of the sector-led Group 8 of the Industry Competence Steering Group, which is looking at competencies across the whole range of disciplines in the built environment. And obviously this one is for procurement. And it is, as it says, a competence framework for procurement practitioners. It says professionals there. We have tweaked it a wee bit, because in terms of some of the last meetings we've had, we've talked about what does it mean around procurement professional. The guidance, or this framework rather, around competence, it is actually aimed at anybody who is undertaking a procurement activity during the whole of the REBA stages 0 to 7. So obviously including the operational phase of buildings as well, which as part of the IWFM team, we really have pushed in this document, that is involved in procurement activity, which, as we know, and most of us on this call will know, so much of that procurement takes place during a building's lifetime, not just when we're designing and building it. It's across industry collaborative documents, so Association of Project Management, CIOB, IWFM, RRCS, SCAPE have also been on the meetings with us, local government authority, several organisations represented. The focus is on the minimum competencies, competence management, assessment of competence. There will, of course, have to be several, I'm sure, follow-on publications and documents to support it. This document is just the framework that sets out those minimum competencies, and we fully anticipate that there will be further information, further documents that come in terms of explaining what's needed, guidance, training, etc. Underpinning all of it, just to sort of finish off really quickly, underpinning all of it is that focus on building safety, making sure that procurement is focused on building safety for all who live and work in buildings in scope. So a really good piece, very iterative, lots and lots of meetings that we've had to try and get it to where it needs to be, and due for publication very soon. So I recommend picking up a copy when it comes out. Thanks ever so much. Cheers, Dan.
Thanks, Chris. If we can move forward. Thank you. So just to highlight and draw attention to IWFM's mentoring program. So that's open to mentors and mentees. Great opportunity to be involved if you're already an IWFM member. If you're not an IWFM member, then a great aspect of IWFM is that peer-to-peer support that is available via IWFM. So a rewarding opportunity to mentor somebody, and also a great opportunity for others to help further their career in FM. Next slide, please. So just to draw attention to anyone who's considering entering the IWFM Impact Awards, that the deadline is fast approaching, 10th of April, and further information is available on the IWFM website. But just wanted to highlight a key event in our diary for the year, a great event taking place there to recognise kind of excellence within the industry. So please do take a look at that. If we can move on. I suppose really a summary for the benefits that you get as a member of IWFM, to supplement Jonathan covered earlier in the AGM. but it really help you, develop your career from a supportive and inclusive FM network and community. So I'll just pause there, just opportunity to scan the QR code and pick up more detail on that if you wish. Okay, if we can move on. And for those members requiring the CPD number for today's session, that's on the screen. And similarly, you can track your CPD by scanning the QR code. Hope everybody's captured that, and we can move forward. And I promise this is the last use of your mobiles on QR codes, but two there to scan there to. Oh, if we could just roll back one slide, just two to scan there to pick up our social media links and follow us on what the activity is there and contribute to that community. Which takes us forward to the next slide, which is a Q&A. If anybody has any general questions for the committee, then please do pop them in the chat. If not, if you want to speak outside of the meeting, more interested in joining IWFM, the Procurement Contract Management SIG, then please feel free to reach out to either Graham or myself and we can provide more detail. And if there's no questions, I'll hand back to Chris.
That's great, Daniel. Thank you very much. I don't think we've got any questions in the chat. So just wrapping up. Thank you again to all of the presenters, especially Jonathan and Rebecca. As a reminder, as Daniel's just mentioned, if you do wish to get involved with the SIG, there's some contact details that Daniel's just presented. Or you come through the IWFM website. Our contact details are on there as well. Always looking for people to support us roll out our plan for next year, as Daniel has outlined. Thanks for all the words about my outgoing post as chair, and Daniel, I wish you all the best in the chair's role moving forward. I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job, and it's been really good having you on the SIG for the last couple of years and all the support you've provided on that. Other than that, I think there's something just coming on the chat there. Sorry, just going back to the CPD numbering, if that's okay, on the slides. There we go. Yeah, other than that, thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you find it an interesting session. As we said, we'll circulate the presentation round after the meeting, and wish you all a good afternoon and good weekend. Thank you very much.